This is the Garden Magic Academy, where we meet Will, our hero who's studying hard. But here, no one can move forward without magic, and Will has no magic at all. To earn enough credits to graduate, he goes into dangerous dungeons to defeat monsters. In class, Professor Edward is teaching magic and asks Will to come up and perform a spell. Will is confused because he doesn't know how to do the spell. The professor gets disappointed, saying the spell is easy and that Will should be able to control fire with a magic tool. Will tries to make the fire appear, but nothing happens, and everyone laughs at him. The professor criticizes him for not being able to do such a simple spell after being at the academy for 6 years. He says Will is good at theory, but bad at using magic. A classmate, Shin, uses his own fire magic to help Will, but the professor scolds him for helping without asking. Shin apologizes, saying he just wanted to help Will. In this world, magic is everything. The more magic you have, the stronger you are. Magic is also the key to power. Wizards are seen as heroes, and magical talent is what matters the most. Even if you know a lot, if you can't use magic, you aren't important. People who dream of impossible things are told to leave the academy. After class, Shin makes fun of Will, saying he looks bad for only defeating weak monsters in the dungeons for credits. Colette steps in to defend Will, telling Shin to stop picking on him. Shin asks why Colette, who's a top student, would defend someone like Will, who's not as skilled as her. Colette says Will works hard, and she tells Shin to stop insulting her friend. Shin laughs, saying that kindness and hard work aren't enough to be a great wizard. He says Will's dream of becoming a magia vendor is impossible, and tells him to leave the academy. Then, he walks away. Colette comforts Will, telling him not to listen to what Shin said. She also says that even Professor Edward was trying to bring him down. Will, however, says that even though he can't use magic, he feels lucky to have someone like Colette care about him. Colette blushes and tells Will not to talk like that to any girl. Will apologizes and says that he was taught to compliment girls, but he really means it when he says she's cute. Colette blushes even more and asks him to stop, trying to keep her noble image. Later, Will is staring at the sky, lost in thought. Colette asks why he's staring. Will says the sky looks really beautiful today. Colette agrees and talks about how the light comes from the 5 greatest wizards, the magia vendors. The story then takes us back to the past, when people lived in darkness and didn't know about the sky. Back then, the world was afraid of the celestial host, but 5 brave wizards fought against them, sealed them in the sky, and brought peace to the world. These 5 wizards became known as the magia vendors, the highest title, and their legacy inspires today's wizards to dream of reaching that level. Colette asks Will if he believes the great wizards, Halo Dice, Metin, Elvis, and Vina, are still watching over them. Will says he believes they are. The story moves to Will's childhood, where he played with his friend Elferia. She told him about a beautiful sunset beyond the sky, saying it was the most beautiful thing ever. To see it, she said they would have to become magia vendors and reach the top of the tower. She promised they would see the sunset together one day. Will remembers it was just a child's dream, but Elferia ended up becoming the youngest magia vendor ever and reached the top of the tower, while Will stayed behind because he had no talent. But he never forgot the promise and still dreams of reaching her one day. Now, Professor Varkon scolds Will for going into the dungeon again. Will apologizes, and the professor asks if he earned any credits. Will excitedly says he defeated an evil guard and earned 2 credits. Will and his familiar, Kiki, are happy about the news. Professor Varkon asks if Will is still dreaming of becoming a magia vendor. Will says confidently that it's not wrong to dream of that. The professor explains that to reach the top of the tower, Will needs to get into the upper institute, which means he needs credits in subjects like writing, spellwork, and practical magic. Will is determined to get enough credits to graduate, even though he can't use magic. The professor tells him it's impossible to earn credits in spellwork without magic, but Will refuses to give up. He decides to try earning credits through practical magic, even though the professor warns him it's almost impossible for someone like him. Will doesn't care how hard it is. He has to find a way to get the credits before the week ends. The professor laughs, doubting that Will can do it in such a short time, but Will is still determined. He starts thinking about what monster could give him the credits he needs. He remembers hearing about a monster called the Besker villain on the 6th floor, and thinks it might be his chance. Will thanks the professor and heads to the dungeon with his familiar Kiki. He tells Kiki that they need to be careful, especially with the monster's fire breath. Meanwhile, Shin hears about Will's plans and decides to go into the dungeon with his friends to make sure Will doesn't get the credits. Shin hopes that if Will fails, he will get kicked out of the academy. Shin and his friends enter the dungeon, and one of them is worried about the danger of the 6th floor. But Shin ignores the warning, thinking Will doesn't deserve to pursue the title of magia vendor because he can't use magic. In the dungeon, a monster appears and knocks one of Shin's friends aside. The others scream in fear, and Will and Kiki rush over. Will quickly realizes it's an evil sentinel, a rare monster worth 10 credits. He's surprised to see it on the 6th floor and wonders why Shin and his friends are there. Shin tries using magic, but it doesn't work. Will watches him struggle and almost considers leaving him behind, but then he remembers his childhood friend Alfia's words of encouragement. Holding the glasses she gave him, Will decides to protect Shin, even though Shin has treated him badly. Meanwhile, Professors Edward and Varkon watch the scene using a crystal ball. They're both surprised by Will's bravery and strength. Professor Edward can't believe how well Will is fighting, especially without magic. Varkon agrees, saying that Will is incredibly fast and skilled with his sword. Will fights the monster skillfully, dodging its attacks and cutting off one of its fingers. The monster gets angry, but Will keeps fighting. He finally cuts off its arm and defeats it with a quick counterattack, cutting the monster in half. Shin is shocked, unable to believe it's the same Will he knew. The professors are amazed, realizing that even without magic, Will's abilities are way beyond ordinary. Professor Edward is stunned, especially since Will doesn't have magic, and leaves in disbelief. Professor Varkon, though upset that Will entered the dungeon without permission, gives him 10 credits for defeating the monster. Will is overjoyed, feeling closer to his goal. 5 years ago, people laughed at Will for not having magic. They thought he only got into the academy because of his connection to Lady Alfea. Now that Lady Elfaria has become a magia vendor, they expected Will to be expelled. Will and Professor Wacken meet the headmaster, who tests Will by attacking him with magic. Will surprises the headmaster by cutting through the magic with his sword. The headmaster decides Will can stay at the academy, saying it'll be interesting to see how he uses his sword instead of magic. Professor Wacken is unsure about allowing someone without magic to stay at the academy, but the headmaster believes it's a test of willpower. Will should work hard if he wants to climb the tower and reach Elfaria. Professor Wacken gives Will a tough lesson. To become a magia vendor, Will must either create new magic or earn 7,200 credits. Professor Wacken doesn't believe will graduate and warns him that his future is uncertain. The students feel discouraged, but Colette tries to stay positive. Edward then calls Will to meet him in the spell hall. There, Edward says he's tired of seeing Will fail at spellwork and decides to give him an extra class just for him. Edward creates a magical circle beneath Will, and while that's happening, Professor Wacken talks to the headmaster. Wacken is worried because Will is facing dangerous magic and knows how tough Edward can be. The headmaster says it's Edward's choice, and he's testing Will to see if he's strong enough to become a magia vendor. Back in the spell hall, Will struggles against Edward's powerful magic. The spells are too strong and Will can't find a chance to fight back. Edward throws Will into the air, injuring him. Will starts to lose hope as he realizes the spells are too fast and powerful. Edward says if Will can't memorize 1,000 spells, he should master just one spell so well that no one can beat him. Will wishes he had his sword with him. Meanwhile, Colette sees that Kiki is hurt and rushes to Will's locker, realizing he's in trouble. Edward keeps attacking, saying that the best wizards are magia vendors, and Will never be great without defeating him. Edward asks if Will knows the story of the dwarf army, where one wizard defeated 10,000 soldiers. He says the magical staff is more powerful than anything else, and Will should forget about becoming a magia vendor. Will responds that he wants to become one because he promised someone special, Elfaria, that he would be with her. Colette then brings Will his sword, and he gets ready to fight. Edward attacks again, but Will uses his sword to block the magic, surprising Edward. Edward creates a wall of fire, but Will doesn't give up. He remembers the Battle of Dwarf F, where the general never gave up, even though many soldiers died. Will believes a sword can be just as strong as magic. He keeps fighting, cutting through the spells, and finally breaks through Edward's magical barrier, landing a hit on him. Edward is impressed and gives Will 5 credits for his spell work before leaving. Colette sees that Will is exhausted, but Professor Wacken praises him for using his sword to find Edward's weakness. The headmaster is also impressed by Will's strength and determination. He's amazed that a sword could break through magic. Will's willpower truly stands out. In a flashback, Elfaria expresses her admiration for Will, calling him kind and brave. She tells him that, despite the obstacles, she will climb the tower and reach him. She promises they will watch the sunset together one day. Will, filled with emotion, promises that he won't cry this hard again. Later, Will is working hard to support his education. While walking, he accidentally bumps into someone, causing newspapers to scatter. Using his quick reflexes, Will manages to catch most of them, but one article catches his attention. It talks about Elfaria breaking records by creating 12 original spells, and it includes an order from her to the academy. Will, realizing the importance, rushes back to his room and asks his roommate, Rusty, to make a magic item for him. Will explains he needs to leave urgently due to Elfaria's request, and Rusty, noticing the urgency, helps him out by giving him some upgraded items. Will heads to the 4th floor, where many students have gathered to fulfill Elfaria's order. He notices Scion effortlessly defeating Frostwalkers, though Scion's bloodlust makes Will uncomfortable. Will decides to go lower in the dungeon and finds a girl surrounded by monsters. He defeats the monsters with his sword, leaving the girl surprised. She's amazed that he used a sword instead of magic, and they introduce themselves. In class, Professor Wakan talks about the importance of creating new magic and how it guarantees a place in history. The students are impressed by Elfaria's achievements, and Rose admires how her order has mobilized the academy. Colette wonders if Will is going to the dungeons to fulfill Elfaria's order. Elsewhere, Iris, who also admires Elfaria, explains her admiration for her, and how she once saved her in a dungeon. Iris reveals she came to the dungeon to help Elfaria, but couldn't find any Frostwalkers. Later, Kiki explains that the larger ice shards left by Frostwalkers suggest the presence of a Frost Rex. She's impressed by Will's knowledge despite him not using magic. Will, using an item from Rusty, attaches a rope to the monster and sets it on fire, defeating it. Iris is amazed by his resourcefulness, thinking Will is more impressive than the rumors suggest.
Iris later visits the Magia Vanders and shares her encounter with Will,
recommending him for the tower. However, Carrie and Elnor dismiss the idea,
suggesting that the Grand Festival will determine if he's worthy.
Geo comments that only talented people can climb the tower, and if Will can't, then it's out of their hands. Elfaria, still asleep, receives the core that Will retrieved, and she expresses her patience and commitment to waiting for him. At the academy, the students are taking tests to earn credits. Xion and Colette pass easily, with Xion having 9,889 credits and Colette 7,340. Will, however, struggles during his test and is mocked by his classmates for not using magic. He fails to defeat his goal. Afterward, the top students, including Liana, Neil, and Julius, easily defeat the goal. Julius challenges Liana and Wignall, showcasing his ice magic, and they accept the challenge. Will reflects on how credits seem to measure abilities, but he doesn't have enough credits to graduate. He has only 5,405 credits. Julius mocks Will, calling him a flunky and saying he's in his way. Will steps aside, but Julius continues to belittle him. Will later shares a meal with Colette, who reminds him that the Grand Magic Festival is a crucial event where different factions seek talented students. Colette suggests Will could still participate to show his abilities, even though Will doubts he has enough magic to impress anyone. The festival preparations continue, and Will works at a restaurant, where his friend Donan encourages him to participate in the festival. Will refuses, but after Julius and his friends mock him and his co-workers, Will defends the dwarfs, reminding them that the food they're eating was earned through hard work. Julius, in anger, freezes everything around him and attacks Will. Will, standing up for himself, challenges Julius, who then tells Will he can embarrass him at the Grand Magic Festival. Will, frustrated, agrees to participate, knowing that Julius plans to humiliate him. The Grand Magic Festival begins with a grand announcement from the principal, who introduces the start of the Sky Race as part of the Founders event. The announcement excites everyone, as it's one of the most anticipated contests. The headmaster mentions that Scott is watching every student carefully, analyzing their actions and making sure that no time is wasted. Eris, who overhears, comments that this is because many powerful mages are outside the tower. Before any of them can recruit talented students, the tower wants to make sure they get to them first. The scene shifts to the Sky Race, where Liana wins for the second time, even breaking the race record. The commentator announces her victory and everyone cheers. Iris, who is watching the race, begins to leave, and the headmaster asks if she's leaving now. She replies that she has work to do and needs to cheer for a senior who's participating. We then see Xion, who's reluctantly participating in the event Crown Attack, an event that Colette had asked him to join. Xion is happy, despite his reluctance, because he doesn't want to upset Colette.
He teasingly says,
"You've realized where you should spend your time. With me, not with that flunky. In the end, I am your choice." After this, Xion heads to the changing room, where he runs into Will. He questions why Will is there, and Colette explains that a team needs at least 21,000 credits to participate in the Crown Attack, and Will's credits were not enough, so they needed Xion to join their team. Will apologizes to Xion for involving him in this, but Xion is not happy about being forced into the situation. He questions why he has to team up with someone like Will, someone he believes to be weak. He also wonders why Colette is even participating in this high-level contest. Just then, Julius passes by, and both Will and Julius glare at each other. Xion feels ignored by Julius and wonders why he's not even acknowledging him.
He's looking right past me.
Colette notices Shion's confusion and asks if something is wrong.
Will says that Cheyennes will now participate against Julius in the crown attack.
The commentator, Mike, introduces the afternoon session of the Grand Festival and describes the excitement of the upcoming crown attack event.
We have the #1 most hated professor, Professor Edward Surfmans!
Prepare a coffin for our next class.
The host stood at the front and started explaining the rules of the event. The competition would place all the participants in random parts of the venue, and each area had different challenges. These challenges were made by elves who created the magical space. However, all the competitors had to pass through one common area, the central forest. Once they got through the forest, they'd reach the main part of the venue. The first team to grab the crown in the center would win the first round. The journey wouldn't be easy with tough conditions, traps set by the best teachers, and strong rivals. 4 teams were the favorites to win. 3 of them were the top teams of the year, almost guaranteed to win. The 4th team, however, was special, Will's team. Will couldn't use magic and people often called him incapable. His participation was mocked and everyone laughed at the thought of him competing in the magic festival. But Will didn't care. He had one goal, revenge on Julius. The competition started and the first obstacle was a field of giant stone golems. These golems formed a tough barrier. To everyone's surprise, Will was the first one to charge in. The crowd laughed. Will had never been able to defeat even a single golem in normal magic classes. But those classes didn't allow weapons, only magic. This time, with Colette's help, Will had magic weapons made of earth. While the weapons weren't as good as a sword, they made Will much stronger. With his incredible physical strength and sword skills, he easily destroyed the golems. Each hit broke a golem in an instant, leaving the audience shocked. This wasn't the Will they thought they knew. Before anyone knew it, Will had passed through the stone barrier, becoming the first to do so. Moving into the rocky desert area, the challenges grew tougher. The traps here tested long-range combat skills, something every magician was good at, except for Will, who had no magic. The audience thought Will would fail, but Colette helped him again. Magical swords appeared all around the area. With these swords, Will's aim was perfect, taking down targets with speed and precision. He destroyed all the hidden traps, and his teammate Cheyenne didn't even have to do anything. The audience was stunned. Will's team cleared the desert faster than anyone expected. Meanwhile, Julius, watching from the sidelines, smirked. He hadn't taken the competition seriously before, but now he realized he needed to try harder. Next, Will's team entered the central forest, the most important area filled with traps. But these traps weren't a challenge for Will. The forest traps made by Eduardo were easily broken, embarrassing their creator. Even though Will's team was ahead, Will wasn't celebrating. He seemed tense. He had a feeling that Julius would be waiting for them in the forest. Will looked for a good hiding spot, hoping to set an ambush. But before he could do anything, an attack came out of nowhere, tearing his clothes. Will turned and saw Julius, who had somehow gotten there first. Colette was shocked. How had Julius made it there so quickly without them stopping? The battle was now unavoidable. Julius attacked with a series of powerful magic blasts, each one stronger than the last. But Will dodged them easily, surprising Julius with his agility. However, what shocked Julius even more was Cheyenne, who seemed to be getting ready for a huge attack. Julius's confidence started to waver. He began to wonder if Cheyenne's target was really just him. Meanwhile, Colette realized something troubling. Cheyenne wasn't there to help Will. He actually planned to take down both Will and Julius. Will, still trying to figure out what was happening, noticed that the area around him had turned into a burning inferno. Julius was gone. Will suddenly understood. Cheyenne planned to eliminate him too, but why? In the past, when others mocked Will for not being able to use magic, Cheyenne had offered to protect him and even suggested that Will become his follower. But Will, valuing his independence, rejected the offer. To Cheyenne, that was a deep humiliation, and over time, his anger grew into something much stronger. He couldn't stand the fact that Will seemed to get by without any magic, while others doubted him. And now, seeing Will unleash hidden strength that no one expected, Cheyenne felt betrayed and angry. The audience, who had thought of Will as weak, now saw him in a completely different light. It was shocking to watch a teammate turn against Will during such an important event, especially with scouts from the prestigious Magic Tower watching. These scouts had once dismissed Will as incapable, but now they were starting to think differently. On the other hand, Cheyenne, once seen as one of the top students in the school, had ruined his own reputation with this outburst. His behavior was so unexpected that even his teacher, Eduardo, was surprised. Cheyenne's attacks became more intense and dangerous as he used his newly perfected fire magic. His Firebird, a huge creature made of flames, was a powerful guardian that could regenerate quickly, making it almost impossible to defeat. Will tried to find a weakness, but every strike seemed useless. The crowd couldn't believe what they were seeing. Cheyenne had truly mastered his magic to this level. Even Eduardo, Cheyenne's teacher, was stunned. Will, who had always been underestimated because of his lack of magic, showed unexpected strength. He jumped high into the air, covering a huge distance before landing like a meteor, shocking everyone watching. Julius had been watching quietly, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. He had already planned an ambush using his ice magic. Julius unleashed a powerful spell that created clones of himself, each with the ability to act on its own. These clones weren't just illusions. They could attack, move, and even self-destruct when necessary. Will recognize the technique immediately. It was one of the legendary magic techniques created by Alaria, one of the greatest mages in the world. To see someone like Julius, a self-taught mage, use such a powerful spell was shocking. Julius started making fun of Alaria, saying her magic isn't as great as people say they are. Will got really upset when he heard this. But one thing he couldn't stand was anyone talking badly about his childhood crush. But as he stepped forward, he noticed that several of Julius's clones had surrounded him. Will had to deal with them first, but that was just a distraction. The real reason Julius sent his clones after Will was to trap him in an ice prison. Will couldn't break free and Julius laughed. Then Julius used his backup plan. Everyone looked up and saw a huge ice spike in the sky. Julius ordered it to fall and it crashed down toward Will. Will couldn't dodge it. Watching this, everyone realized how powerful Julius was. Even Eduardo praised him, saying, "Winning without moving, this is the mark of real talent in magic." And he was right. Julius's real body hadn't moved at all. It was only his clones doing everything. Feeling confident, Julius started boasting. He asked if his power now made him worthy to be Alfaria's successor. The crowd cheered, thinking he was the best choice. But some people mocked him, saying he was only using tricks. Just then, Will broke free from the ice. The first thing he said surprised everyone. He thanked Julius. It turned out the magic had helped calm him down, since Alfaria's name always made him too excited. Julius didn't care and attacked again, sending his magic to control Will. But Will was now a different person. He quickly moved behind Julius's two helpers and took them out with one strike. He did this because he had figured out Julius's weakness. When the helpers fell, all of Julius's clones disappeared too. The audience was confused, but Will explained that Julius's magic wasn't perfect. His clones didn't think for themselves and needed help to control them. As Julius got angry, far away on the top of a tower, Alfaria's deputy was telling her that Julius's performance made him seem like a good choice for successor. But Alaria wasn't interested in a successor. She wanted someone who could stay by her side. Meanwhile, the battle continued. Once Will regained his focus, he was unstoppable. Julius still thought he had a chance, but without his helpers, his clones were just sitting targets. A clone is still just a clone. As long as Will could spot the real Julius, he knew he'd win. And that's exactly what happened. Will quickly found Julius's real body. Julius tried to defend himself with an ice wall, but his magic wasn't strong enough. The ice shattered, causing him pain. What bothered Julius more than the pain was how Will had figured out his secret. Will realized that Julius's clones had a flaw. Their body temperature was very cold, around -36 degrees Celsius. This made the ground around them freeze. If Julius had truly mastered his magic, this wouldn't have happened. This revelation shattered Julius' pride. He couldn't understand how Will knew his magic better than he did. Will didn't hide the truth, explaining that he and Alaria were childhood friends. They had both grown up in the same orphanage and were orphans, so he understood her magic deeply, its strengths and weaknesses. This revelation made Julius feel humiliated. His pride in mastering this magic now seemed foolish, like a little girl's mistake. This realization pushed him over the edge. He laughed wildly and then used his last resort, creating 8 clones, the most he could control. But Will destroy them one by one, shattering Julius's confidence. Desperate, Julius tried to resist, pulling and struggling, but soon he realized that no matter how hard he fought, Will kept getting closer. No matter how fast or strong his attacks were, they couldn't stop Will. In the end, Will didn't even need his sword. He used his fist to end the fight. With one punch, the battle was over, and the crowd erupted in excitement. A nobody with no magic had just defeated an elite student with over 10,000 academic points, something they never thought possible. Just as the referee was about to declare Will the winner, another figure stepped in. It was Wignall, one of the top 3 students in the year. He had quietly appeared, and according to the rules, his team claimed the championship. Will was disappointed but wasn't focused on the win. He had achieved his goal for entering the competition. However, what Will didn't know was that far away at the tower, the surprising truth was that Will's male roommate, whom he had lived with for years, was actually a magical clone created by Alaria. The clone was meant to keep an eye on Will and prevent him from flirting around, leaving Colette, who had liked him, confused. She mistakenly thought her rival was a man. When Rosti stepped away to get drinks, Colette couldn't resist asking Will about his relationship with Rosti. She jokingly asked if Rosti was secretly a woman in disguise. Just then, Rasta returned with drinks for both of them. Will had planned to spend the day fixing his sword, but since the dwarves didn't like magic users, he had to do it alone. Colette and Rosti, however, had an unspoken understanding that Will didn't notice. After Will left to work on his sword, Colette asked Rosti if he had romantic feelings for Will. Rosti didn't hesitate and openly admitted that he cared about Will more than anyone else. Their conversation turned into an argument just as Will bumped into Lehana, the top student. She said she needed to talk to him, so he followed her to a large house. What he saw inside shocked him. Several familiar faces, including the top 4 students, were gathered. Lehana explained that they needed to form the strongest team for an upcoming practicum and tackle the dungeon together. However, Cheyenne and Julius didn't expect Will to be part of the team. As Cheyenne tried to voice his displeasure, Wignall stepped in, and they all walked into a beautiful flower field created by the elves to ease the tension. In this peaceful place, Lehana explained that Will had unique skills that would be helpful for the dungeon challenge. But Julius mocked Will, saying he would be fine as long as Will didn't slow them down. To everyone's surprise, Wignall defended Will, reminding them that Will had already beaten them before and proved his worth at the Grand Magic Festival. He trusted Lehana's judgment and pointed out that people like her had received offers after the festival, so why was she placing so much importance on a simple practicum? Lehana calmly replied that although she had received offers to advance in the tower, those were just stepping stones. What mattered to her and everyone present was reaching the level of the Supreme 5 staffs. She asked everyone to place a coin in a cup to mark the beginning of something bigger. After hearing this, Cheyenne and Julius quickly put aside their issues with Will, realizing that their personal grudges didn't matter as much as joining the Supreme 5 staffs. Will was now part of this new team. The day of the practicum arrived. The students were to survive for a week in the dungeon, with teachers stationed on different floors to assist students who couldn't continue. The teachers warned them to be extremely cautious, as many students had perished in previous years. However, as the teachers explained the rules, a huge threat appeared. What seemed like a normal practicum quickly turned deadly.
Let the all-student praxis begin.
Right.